All right. Good morning, everyone. Just a reminder to everyone that we are recording this forum and it will be posted to our YouTube channel later today. So it's 11, so I will go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy day to join us for the GCA Summer Forum. If everyone could check to make sure that they are muted, that would be greatly appreciated. This helps reduce the background noise during our presentations. Please ask us questions using the chat feature in Zoom. We will make sure to pause periodically to answer them. This meeting is for you, so please don't be shy engaging with us today. I also wanted to let you know that we will be sticking around after the forum in case you want to ask us questions afterwards. Be receiving or have already received a grant tracker inquiry from our reporting team. Some of the most common messages you will receive from us revolve around the following: stipend corrections or unallowable charges, request to review your outstanding trainee obligations schedule, which includes tuition. Please help us to approve your termination notices quickly, submit your financial report on time, and close out your budget by making stipend corrections right away, confirming and completing your outstanding trainee obligations schedule, and providing a budget number for your deficit transfers. My second announcement is about the new advanced budget process. We are about 3 months into the new advanced budget process, and you may have noticed that even though we no longer require a dollar amount for your budget, GCA has been adding $1 under object code 3600. So why are we doing this? The $1 under object code 3600 is a placeholder for our GCA systems in order to identify your budget as an advanced budget. This helps us to exclude the budget from automated reports and processes like our letter of credit draws and also auto-generated interim financial reports. This $1 will be removed and replaced with the sponsor-approved award budget once GCA processes your funding action. With the removal of the budgeted amounts, you will notice that your advanced budgets will start showing up on your department deficit reports. If you would like to learn more about the new advanced budget process, I have provided links to both GCA's website and ORIS's website. Does anyone have any questions regarding either the training grant notification I just talked about or the GCA advanced budget process?
Not seeing anything in the chat.
All right, thank you, Susan. All right, so now we're going to start our grant tracker overview. I'm going to start us off with showing you how to access grant tracker. I will then go over the left-hand side menu and search page, as well as the budget information and open grant tracker notes section. I'm going to start off with showing you how to access grant tracker. All right, so if you start your day with MyFD, many of us do, you can access grant tracker from here. If you go to the right-hand side of the page and click on the More Systems drop-down menu, just like I did it here, the menu expands to show you links to other websites you may find useful. Grant tracker is the third link from the bottom. Once you click that link, you'll be taken to the grant tracker webpage housed on the GCA website. On our website, you will want to go to the Training and Outreach menu, which is in the middle of our website navigation menu. Just roll your cursor on top of the Training and Outreach, and a drop-down menu will appear. A link to our grant tracker page will be the third link from the top. Also, a shameless plug, here is a link to past GCA forums in case you have missed them. Before I go to Grant Tracker, I just want to point out a few things. Let me remove my menu here. On the Grant Tracker page. So this is where you're going to go. So many of the subjects that we are going to be discussing today are also laid out in the user guide. A link to our user guide is right here on the website, as well as it's broken down into chunks. So if there's something in particular that you're looking for, you can just click on these links here. When you first log into Grant Tracker, you will see the search page. As you can see, there are a number of ways you can search for information about the budgets you manage. You can search by one field or use a combination of fields to narrow your search down to a specific set of budgets based on what you're trying to research. On the left-hand side, we have provided a few links that you may find helpful with managing your sponsored budget. We have links to both frequently used pre- and post-award central offices and their websites. However, the first three links up here are specific to GCA and Grant Tracker. My TranspaZoo is a way to look at all your online TranspaZoo submissions, and the Maintain Campus Contacts is where you can assign department contacts for your sponsored award budgets. I will actually go over this in just a little bit. I do want to spend some time going over the org code report here, as I feel like this report may be underutilized. So if you click this link, you are going to come to this page. So I don't really have a lot of time to go into too much detail about this report, but I did want to briefly go over the different reports that are generated here. For the sake of time, I have already pre-populated an org code and did a search. And here are the different reports we have for you. Budgets with open grant trackers. So you can see at a glance what open grant trackers have not been resolved. Budgets with final action or end dates in the next 90 days. Super handy when you're trying to figure out what budgets are closing. Budgets with open invoices, so you can see if there's any problems with sponsors paying. And all budgets. So it would be all the budgets under the org codes that you search by. These reports can all be exported to Excel, so you can create your own customizable report just for you or your department. This report can only be found here in Grant Tracker, but of course there are similar reports that you can use in BI Portal. But before I move on, I just want to let you know that Grant Tracker is only for sponsored budgets. You cannot find information for state and self-sustaining budgets in Grant Tracker. Only budgets that are categorized as grants or gifts. When you receive your funding action or PAC notification, we strongly encourage you to review the budget information in Grant Tracker the next day. UW systems update overnight. Your budget or budget changes will be viewable the next day. The very first section here you will see in Grant Tracker is the budget information. Something I do want to point out that when you're looking at a budget, the add new sub-budget link will appear on the left-hand side menu. So that way you can create new sub-budgets for your new budget. The majority of the information found here is listed on your funding action, and this section is meant to give you a quick overview of the key parts of the award. If you notice an error or have any questions, please send us a Grant Tracker right away so we can review and get things corrected for you. Excuse me. Especially if you have an invoiceable budget. We don't want wrong information on the very first invoice. One of the most important items you need to take note of is your budget's final action date, which can be found here on the left-hand side near the bottom. This is the date that all expenditures must post to the budget so that GCA can issue a final invoice or report by or before the sponsor's due date. This includes your cost share. Your cost share needs to be met by this date as well. When reviewing your budget, you may notice that on the right-hand side under record retention trigger date, it may say unavailable. This is a known issue, and our systems team is currently working on getting that fixed. If you are working on an archive project and need that date, please contact us via Grant Tracker or by email at GCA Help if you have a list of budgets that you need help coming up with an estimated date, and we can do that for you. Before I discuss email contacts here, I want to briefly discuss Open GT Notes section here. This section will populate if you have any open grant trackers on the budget. For example, this budget does not have any open inquiries. But this budget does. You will actually notice there are two open grant trackers. If you are looking at your parent budget, this section will show all the open inquiries for both the parent and sub budgets. However, if you're looking at the sub budgets individually, they will only show open grant trackers for those budgets only. Now I want to circle back to email contacts. This is a very important section we would like to call your attention to. If this section is not populated, the default contact is the PI. GCA sends out important notifications regarding your budget using Grant Tracker. We always want to try and contact the administrative staff first, but in order to do so, we have to resort to EGC1 contacts and any Grant Tracker inquiries on prior budgets. As you know, that information is not up to date. So please help us help you. Fill out this section once your new budget is set up. Another important thing to note is that a contact email must contain uw.edu as the domain. Due to a security scare a few years ago, we had to lock down the contact information to UW employees only. All right, so circling back to email contacts, I am going to go to the Grant Tracker test website. So I'm not, doing anything bad to anyone's budget here. All right, so you'll notice that when there's no email contacts, there is this bold warning message. So if you need to add a contact, you need to go to the Go to Campus Contacts email maintenance page. There are actually 3 links alone, again, on the left-hand side that I pointed out earlier, over here, and further down in the contact information section, right over here. All right, so when you click this link, you're going to get this page. You can update an individual budget, or you can do a large amount of budgets by org code and or principal investigator. Please be aware that you will override the contact information that is currently listed if you choose to do a bulk update by org code or PI. So be careful. So now I'm going to show you how to add contacts to your budget. So as you can see here, again, no emails. I'm going to hit this edit button here, and I'm going to add one email. If I want to add more, I'm going to do comma, space, and then there you go. So once you're done, go ahead and hit update. Wait for it just to make sure it actually happens. Oh no, I'm experiencing difficulties here. Oh goodness, of course I would. All right, let me try something else. I'm gonna put my email. Let's see if that. Okay, it's not liking it. I'm so sorry, you guys. Okay, so I am going to show you a budget that does have, just so you see how it looks like. So this is what it's going to look like when you see that the email contacts are populated. And if you actually go to this page here, you'll see here, like when it was updated, who updated it, and then how you can edit. So remember, if there's any changes in your department, do a search by org code like I showed you earlier, and make sure to remove anyone who is outdated, because they will get the updates from us if you don't. All right, so that's enough of the demo for now. So some of the key points I brought up at the demo are listed here on these slides here, and you can review them after the forum. Are there any questions?
We do have a couple of questions in the
Cool.
chat. The first one is, when does GCA record the record retention trigger date?
Oh gosh, it should actually happen right when we set up your budget. So that's what's a little discouraging, is when that doesn't show up. So, a lot of people, when the budget's first set up, you're not really worried about record retention data or anything like that because it's brand new and current. But, when you're working with closed budgets, that's when you're most likely going to see this and need help. So again, it's supposed to pop up right away as far as I know, but yeah, we're running into some issues, but we hope to have that resolved. And again, we are so happy to do the estimated dates to help you out, because I know if you go to the record retention website, it's got, if this, then, and that, and it's very confusing, but since we know grants, we can take care of you. All right.
Okay, and the second question is, do the org code reports include the final action dates?
Yes, they do. Let me go back. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, here you go. So I apologize. I had to go through it briefly because we've got a lot to cover. But yes, it does have the final action date. So you can actually click these here and sort if you don't want to, export. Like maybe if you only have like a small group here, like here we only have 6. So you can just easily figure out which one is like the most important to focus on. And then of course you can export and then even do further analysis. But yes, to answer your question, the final action date is on this report.
Okay, and that's all the questions we have for now.
Oh, fantastic. All right, thanks you guys. All right, so I'm going to hand it off to my awesome colleague, Michelle, to walk you through the financial information.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to quickly go over the financial information section in Grant Tracker. So this is a quick way to see what's been awarded or allocated to your budgets and what's been spent so far. So first, this award revenue section, it's what's allocated to your budget. And if you have sub budgets, then you'd see how the total budget is broken down between the parent and the subs. And then next to this award revenue section, you would see expenditures. So this is expenditures to date. It should hopefully match what you see in my FD. And then the next two is encumbrance and open balance. So these are projected amounts or charges or like projected expenses that haven't hit the budget yet. So you can actually hide these columns if you don't want to look at the amounts by unchecking these boxes. And then this last column here, balance, it's what you have left to spend on your budget. So if you can go to the next slide, I'm going to go over a few different award types and how they appear. And this first one is a cost reimbursable award. And you'll see that we have these 3 columns that are labeled invoice, receipt, and open. So as with cost reimbursable awards, we invoice based on actual expenditures. You'll see that we've invoiced 162,000 or so, and we've also received the same amount. And then open would be whatever we haven't received payment for, but in this case, we have no open invoices left. Go to the next slide. This is a cost reimbursable award with sub-budgets. And in this particular example, we actually have invoicing going on one of the sub-budgets separate from the parent. You'll see that the parent budget lists an invoice receipt amount as well as sub-budget. So next slide. So here we have a letter of credit award. So this is basically like a federal award, like a National Institutes of Health or a HRSA award. For these, we actually draw down funds based on expenditures. So whereas that prior example, we had invoice receipts and open, for these letter of credit awards, you'll see this different column labeled drawn, which shows how much we've drawn to date. And for this example, you'll see that we have drawn up to the current expenditure total. So in the next slide, this is a letter of credit award with sub-budgets. And for this, you'll see that we show a drawn amount next to the parent as well as all the subs to show like how much we've drawn against each budget. And then at the very bottom, we have this line called totals to show the cumulative total that we've drawn down. And the cool thing about this drawn amount is that it's actually a link. So if you were to click on any one of these, you would be taken to an overview of the cash draws on the next slide, which lists out all the draws that have been done. And you can actually filter these by date if you just wanted to look at specific draws within a date range. And additionally, you can click on any of these draw amounts if you wanted to see what was included in these draws. So if you were to click on this 22,000 one, you would see in this next slide here that it was a charge in 0362. So that was my super quick overview of the financial info section. Does anyone have any questions?
We do have another question that I think is related to Azalea's section. It's, should we wait to be contacted by GCA around the final action date to close the budget, or do you recommend ever doing it sooner if you know there won't be any more transactions between the end of the grant and the final action date?
It's always nice to get some of those early inquiries, especially if you're super done before your final action date and you just don't want any more expenditures hitting your budget. So we really don't mind those. Those are actually great. It also helps our teams when they're trying to reconcile, especially this time of year where we have the highest volume for the next couple of months. If there are budgets that are ready for a report and we can see the department is super ready, we will actually jump on those reports and get those submitted quicker. Because we have to balance between all the different reports that are due every couple of weeks, invoices and whatnot. It's kind of nice to know that information. However, you know, if it's fine and it can go on the final action date and everything's taken care of, it'll, you know, flip to 3 and then we'll start the processes for final invoice and final report. So you do not have to contact us, but if you are ready before your final action date, it's beneficial if you do. All right, any more questions, Susan?
Not that I'm seeing yet.
All right. And also people who have asked questions, if I didn't quite answer them correctly, or if you need more clarification, please let me know. Happy to discuss. Okay. Thanks, Michelle. All right. Oops, went backwards there. All right, so now it's me again. So I am going to take you through a few more sections of Grant Tracker. And it's these sections listed here. So back to live demo. Okay, so wrong one. Okay, let me go to the correct budgets. Yes, perfect. Okay, so Michelle went over the financial information, and I am going to take you to the next place. So contact information. So the contact information lists our phone number, so you don't have to go searching for it. And our phone lines are open from 9 to 12 and 1 to 4. So happy to hear your voices since we're all working from home. It's nice. If you want to submit questions online, you can submit it through Grant Tracker using this large purple button. And I'm going to go over more of that later. And here's a quick view of the budget contacts, like I listed earlier. So that way you don't have to scroll all the way up to see if, who the contacts are. If your sponsor requires financial reports, you'll find them listed out in the report section here. Please know that GCA will populate this section within a week of setting up your new budget. So please don't panic if you don't see the reports section populated the next day. But if you don't see your reports after 2 weeks, definitely contact GCA Help immediately. Again, like I said, we're in the midst of high volumes. And so we're not getting to these as timely as we usually do, but give us at least 2 weeks. But if you don't see it, let us know, because we know that's super important for us. We just want to make sure it's not missed, and it's super important to you too. So if your budget goes for several years and your sponsor requires separate year accountability for each fiscal year, the financial reports will be set up under each sub-budget. So here you've got an example. So here's an example where the budget, where all the annual reports are set up in each sub. And I'm currently looking at the parent budget. And you can see all the reports due for this particular award. This is to provide you with an at-a-glance view of all the reports due. If you're reviewing a sub-budget, however, you will see only the report due for that particular sub. And here's an example of a budget that I like to call having a rolling report. So if a sponsor doesn't require a separate year accountability and only requires a cumulative annual report, or rolling, throughout the life of the award, we will only set up the report on the parent. So this one also has a parent and sub relation. We roll everything up to the parent in the award, or I should say that we combine everything on the award. Okay, so notice the difference between the rolling reports and the separate year accountability reports. Excuse me. So that's just a visual for you to keep in mind. So the next section in Grant Tracker is EGC1s. Let me flip back to this one. So you will notice that all the associated EGC1s are listed here. This is highlighted, so this is actually a link, and it'll take you to My Research. So that way it's an added convenience, so you don't have to go looking for My Research if you don't have that website open. This section here, the notes section, will contain all the grant trackers ever created for a budget. Let me go back to this one because this had quite a few. The most current grant tracker is always going to be on top. Another neat feature is that you can actually expand this table so you can look at all the attachments. This can come in handy if you're quickly trying to look for a file, or if you're not sure you uploaded a particular file, all without having to drill down into the grant tracker note. Before I circle back on how to submit an inquiry in grant tracker, excuse me, I just want to touch briefly on the EDMS attachment section. Most of the time you're going to see that this section is usually blank, and that's because we stopped using EDMS a few years ago. We used to use it to upload financial reports. If you are doing research on old budgets that are still accessible in Grant Tracker, this is probably the only time you will see any attachments in that section. All right, so now to circle back on submitting a Grant Tracker and go back to the test site. Okay, so if you'd like to submit a question to us, you can either use any of these purple buttons here. So when you're logged in, you're going to notice that your information is going to automatically populate. And if there's any campus contacts, they will be included as well. I just feel bad that my demo didn't quite work, but they were supposed to populate the email addresses here so you can see it. So if you're not sure what topic to submit this under, you can click this faded blue question mark button here, and it's going to pop up a glossary. So you can see the topics at a glance with a quick and dirty description of what they are. Also, just a pro tip, if you are submitting TransPazoo's, this does not go to the grant analyst. This actually goes straight into the intake for our budget setup team. So if you want to make sure that your TransPazoo gets into their queue, I highly suggest you submit your TransPazoo's in Grant Tracker. I know sometimes it is easier to do email, especially if you have to route it around for electronic signatures. If you're using the paper form or the PDF form, I should say. But if you have the chance, please upload them in Grant Tracker under TransPazoo, and that actually gets to them faster. All we do is actually take your email, copy and paste it in the Grant Tracker. And sometimes it does take a while for us to get through all our emails. We get over, 100 each day. So if you want faster service, Grant Tracker is the way. All right. When you populate the subject field, use a phrase that would be helpful to both you and us, like rebudget request or org code change. Then here you'd fill out your request here in this box. And actually, I'm actually supposed to click something so I can show you something. Okay, so if I needed to add a file, I just click here and upload it before I submit. Okay, you're going to get this message that says that it went through. Okay, and let me see if I can go back. Oh, that's how I was supposed to click it. Okay, so so you submit your thing, and then you check your Grant Tracker notes. You're actually going to see your new note as the very first one. All right. So something I do want to point out is here's the statuses. So here, this is late. These ones are pending. Not quite sure why it doubled on me there. The last date it was updated and who was created by. And in a little bit, my colleague Austin will go over some very helpful tips and tricks when sending or responding to a Grant Tracker inquiry. So please stay tuned for that. That's the end of my demo. Going back to the slides here. And again, I've put some key points in these slides here that you can take a look at later. Are there any questions?
There are no new questions at this point.
Fantastic. All right. So next is my other awesome colleague, Susan.
Hello, I am going to talk today about how Grant Tracker can show you the money for invoiceable budgets. This is actually something that you can only do in Grant Tracker. The budget amount you see in MyFD does not reflect invoices and cash receipts. It only reflects the amount of the award as awarded by the sponsor. Next slide, please. So just to go over some of the basics that you can see in the financial information line, it's a little bit of a review of what we've already gone over. But in cases where a budget is invoiced rather than letter of credit, you will see an invoice, receipt, and open section. The top example here is a case where all of our invoices have been paid. And the second example shows a case where we've issued multiple invoices and at least one of them has not yet been paid. And so you see that open amount there. Next slide. And then you can scroll down on that budget information page to the invoices section. And what this will show you is a list of all the invoice numbers that have been issued on a particular budget. When you're in the live system, you can click on any of those blue hyperlinks and it will bring up a PDF of the invoice. The email to sponsor link we'll go over in a little more detail later, but it's a way that you can quickly and easily get a copy of an invoice to the sponsor if needed. Invoice date is what it says. It's the day that invoice was created. The amount, again, that's pretty straightforward. Open amount shows whether there's any amount remaining to be paid. In this case, all of the invoices have been paid, so that amount shows as 0. The reference number is there for it's showing kind of what sponsor information is telling that we're sending to tell the sponsor what this is related to. This case, it looks like it's a grant number. In some cases, it will be a name that's the attention to information for that particular award. Invoice period shows the last day of the billing period. For example, that top one looks like that's our November invoice, and the invoice period ended on 11/30. The due date, that is the point in which we will consider the invoice past due if it's not received by that time, and our age receivables team will begin sending out friendly reminders and following up as needed. Usually that's going to be a month after the invoice is issued, but if there's any case where we know that, say there was an issue where an invoice didn't get to the right person or extra backup was needed, we can reset the due date so that we're not sending past due notices on something the sponsor has only had for a few days. Finally, you'll see there's a little green F by the last invoice there, and you'll see there's a key right under there that shows that that's the final invoice for this award. If it was a green R, it would indicate a revised final. We also have the orange V for voided and the purple I for internal invoices. We'll go over those in a little more detail as well. Next slide. So this is an overview where we can see something that the invoicing, there's just the last one was something where everything just was gone really smoothly and we received all of our payments. In this case, we see one where we voided an invoice. It's indicated by that little V. We've likely discovered some kind of error or sponsor issue that we had to deal with. So when an invoice has been voided, you can still view what it originally looked like using that hyperlink on the invoice number, but you no longer have that option to click and email it to the sponsor, because once it's voided, we don't want to give it to the sponsor because that will just create confusion. And so the invoice amount shows as 0. If you looked at that PDF, it would show the original amount, but this does show it as 0 because it's been voided. And finally, you can see that our last invoice there, we haven't yet received payment on it. And so the invoice amount has an open amount. And in rare cases, sponsors will partially pay an invoice. For example, in this case, if the sponsor had paid $170,000, the open amount would show $2,325. Next slide. So this is the interface that you get if you click on that email invoice to the sponsor button. It will default to your name and email address, but you can change that if you need to. For example, if I was using this, I would probably change the email to GCA Help. The to and CC, that's going to be the sponsor email, wherever you're sending that. It will automatically BCC it to you, so you'll have a copy of the invoice as sent for your records. Subject line defaults to the invoice number. You can add to that if you need to. You also have a nice basic message filled in there. You want to be sure you insert the sponsor's name, and so it doesn't come to them as insert name here. And you can add any other additional information or note before signing that. The attachments, it automatically attaches the invoice itself. But if you're doing it to send backup, and this will often be when you're using this, if it's a case where GCA prepares the invoice, but we ask that the department provide any backup receipts, timesheets, or whatever, this is where you could attach that. And when you send this, it will create a grant tracker note so that we will know that invoice has been emailed. And you have the option to either include those attachments with the grant tracker or not. So it's hopefully a pretty straightforward little interface, but if you have any questions, you can always contact us. Next slide. This is what it looks like when we have internal invoices. And the reason we create these is in some cases, the sponsor requires an invoice format that we can't do with our automatic invoicing systems. If we can't create it automatically with our software, we have to, if we're doing it by hand, it's not going to show up in Grant Tracker as it was submitted. But we still do have to create a system version of the invoice to track and record the payment. And so that's what that internal invoice is. It's just something for us to receive and record the payment, and it doesn't look like what the sponsor gets. And that's why we don't want those to be sent out, because in most cases, it's a case where a sponsor has a specific template. And so if they suddenly get the UW format invoices when they're expecting their own template, that will just confuse them. And so if you see that purple eye for an internal invoice, do not download that PDF and send it to the sponsor. That will just create confusion. And if you have any question about what's actually going to the sponsor, you can always contact us via Grant Tracker. Next slide. And then if you scroll down from invoices, there is also a receipt section. And that shows you what payments we've received in response to those invoices. You see the receipt number. In cases where it's a check, that would be the check number. In other cases, it would be a number identifying the wire transfer. The receipt date, that generally actually shows the date of the check or the date that the electronic funds transfer was issued. The GL date there on the other side, that shows when it was posted to the budget. In many cases, that's the same date or very close to it, but sometimes there'll be a bit of a gap, like you can see on the second to last payment there, that the receipt date is May 1st, but the GL date is June 8th. And what that usually means is that for whatever reason, there was some kind of delay in identifying the payment and getting it posted properly. It might have been sent to the wrong bank account or the wrong address, or it's been sent as part of a lump with multiple invoices paid on the same transaction. And we had to do some research to figure out what went where. And then the receipt amount shows the amount of the payment. And the invoice number matches that up to whichever one of our invoices the payment was applied to. Next slide. It does look like we've got a couple of questions in the chat. First, we've got, for invoicing, is there a way to generate invoices for items that are not automatically paid? For example, salaries are billed separately. So is there a way that we can use Grant Tracker to generate this invoice to send to the vendor? Okay, I'm a little unclear what's going on with that one. With our invoices, we are, with a cost reimbursable invoice, we are invoicing everything that's posted in MyFD. So whether it's salary or anything else would automatically be on our invoices. So if you can clarify that either here in the chat, or possibly you can always email GCA help with like the specific budget and situation, and we can clarify that. We also have any tips on how to communicate special invoice instructions, such as specific email subject lines, email address changes, etc. If what's that saying is how that you can communicate that to us if you're hearing from the sponsor, you can always contact us via Grant Tracker or email them to gcahelp@uw.edu, and we can make updates in our process based on that information. This happens. What happens on GCA's end when campus has created a Grant Tracker note for email invoice to sponsor? That we basically just see it, and it tells us when that invoice was sent, and so we can update the due date if needed. We just note that for our records. Next we have, is there any way to generate a report that includes directs awarded separate from indirects, perhaps by org code? I don't think that's anything that we could do from Grant Tracker. There may be a way to do that with the BI portal. I'd have to take some time to look at that. Then have a clarification on that first question. What do we do about items posted in MyFD that did not populate on the invoice? For that, we'd encourage you to reach out via Grant Tracker so we can research the issue and make any corrections that need be. Because if it's a cost reimbursable invoice, and it's and the budget is not in deficit, anything in my FD should populate to the invoice. Okay, that looks like all the questions for this topic. And I believe my colleague Austin will be next.
Yeah, so I'll be going over grant tracker etiquette. Next slide. So responding to grant tracker notifications, when a grant tracker is updated, if you're included as a contact on the note, you will receive an email notification that looks like this. But please do not respond to this email. If you respond to this email, it will send your message to the GCA help inbox instead of updating the note in grant tracker itself. Next slide. And so to update the note, you need to click View in Grant Tracker, which will open the note in the Grant Tracker system in your browser. And next slide. And it'll open up like this. And you need to click Update Question or Add a File, which will bring you to the note edit form. And that's where you should insert your response that will be submitted. Next slide. So if you're responding to a grant tracker notification, you need to make sure that you're listed in either the email list or the CC list in the form. If you're not listed there, you won't receive notifications via email when a grant tracker note is updated. So information may be delayed. And this comes up, I feel like, when like a PI or a colleague in your department, they receive the grant tracker notification via email, and maybe they forward you that email to take a look and respond. But if you aren't in the original list on the form, then if you respond to GCA and we write something back, you won't receive what we've sent back. And so when you go into that form, there is a place, the CC line is a field that can be edited when you're making the update. So just make sure that if you're not already included on that note, to add your email. And also, please don't CC GCA help at uw.edu on the line. We already get notifications through the grant tracker system when notes are updated. So there's no need to CC us, since it'll just send us an extra email when we don't need it. Next slide. So new grant tracker notes. When GCA initiates or updates a grant tracker note, please respond to that note with the requested information. Don't open a new note for the response. Opening new notes creates additional work and may delay the transmittal of your response. And new notes would be appropriate for requests similar to prior requests that have been resolved, or a completely new request. I think there's a little confusion sometimes around whether to start a new note or respond to an open note or reopen a note. And so I have some examples here of situations where you would still want to request a new note, even if there is a prior note that seems like the same thing. So first example is like an org code change. So if you requested a change back in June to org code B, but now you want it to be org code C, don't reopen that note, even though it is still an org code change. Send us a new note just because it's a completely new request. Another example I have is about financial reports. So, maybe we were completing a report for the period ending in the end of June. And so we were going back and forth with your department about information required for that report. And now there's a new report coming up. Don't reopen that one, just start a new note so we can keep the communication in one place for the new report, since it's probably not related to the old report that we've already submitted. And then another example, like budget status changes. I've seen these happen a lot where department requests change to status 3, and then they reopen that grant tracker to request it be changed back to status 1. It's more clear if you request separate notes for these different changes, and maybe include that in the subject line, like change status to 1 or something like that, so that then if GCA or your department is reviewing the grant tracker notes for some reason at a later time, it's easy to see the timeline for the different action items. Next slide. So we complete notes when an issue is resolved. So unless that exact request was left unresolved, a new note would be appropriate. So that being said, if the issue was unresolved, you may need to actually reopen a note. And so some examples of situations where reopening a note would be appropriate are, say you requested an org code change. We said we completed it, but we actually had a typo in the org code. We changed it to. Well, you should reopen that note if possible to notify us of the error, and then we'll be able to make the correction. Another example is about our courtesy reminders for unbilled milestones. We send these out to remind your department that there's a deliverable that can be invoiced for based on the date in the agreement. So we just need to know if the work's been done and we can actually invoice for that. But we automatically mark these as completed since they're just kind of a reminder, and there isn't any action that needs to be taken. But if there is a deliverable that we do need to invoice for that we've sent you that notification about, you should reopen that note to provide us an update. But something we see come up quite a bit is for these unbilled milestone grant tracker notes. Say we send you a note about milestone 1, you let us know it's okay for us to invoice. We go ahead and invoice. We mark the note completed, and then your department's ready for us to invoice for milestone 2. Well, oftentimes I see that original request regarding milestone 1 has been reopened, but actually the correct thing to do would be to submit a new note since you're asking for a new invoice, like for a different deliverable. And next slide. All right, notes marked completed for 90 days or longer cannot be reopened, so you must submit a new note. The grant tracker system will let you know when you can no longer reopen the note because of its age, and it'll just prompt you to create a new one and take you directly to that form. Next slide. Duplicate requests. So just a reminder, when submitting a request or any information related to a budget to GCA, please choose between submitting a grant tracker note and an email. The recipient of the email may be a different person than the intended recipient of the grant tracker update, so additional work is created and possibly confusion when processing these requests. However, if you do need to send something via email that is related to a grant tracker conversation, please reference the note and/or GCA contact you have been working with. Next slide. Some key takeaways from this section. When grant tracker notes are submitted correctly, the risk of duplicate work or delay of information transmittal is reduced. Grant tracker notes help both your department and GCA store budget-related information and the correspondence in a central place, which can help with researching and understanding the story of the budget at a later time. And another reminder, please do not send the same request via email and grant tracker. Next slide. Any questions?
Not seeing any questions in the chat.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Austin. All right. Thank you again for taking the time to join our forum today. I hope it was very helpful. Our next forum will be in November. And as always, we'll be sending out a survey to find out what you liked and what we could do better for the next forum. Also, please note, we're going to ask you guys about grant tracker outages. I know over the summer we had 2, which sent campus into a panic, and it also sent us into a panic. How can we best communicate that to campus? So please fill out our survey. The slide deck and video from today will be uploaded by end of day today to our website, shown here. Again, you can always contact us, just like Austin said, grant tracker, email, or phone, but please only pick one. This concludes today's forum. We are now open for questions for those of you who would like to stick around. Please send them through the chat feature. Thank you.